And, depending upon what the job is, the type of people you're going to choose. Well, it says that the householder went into the marketplace, and he found some workers. And he said, I'm going to take you, you, and you. And he said, and I'll pay you a penny a day. Well, the word translated penny here is the word denarius, which basically was a small silver coin. Basically what it represented was a day's wages. He said, we'll agree on a price. I'll give you a denarius for working today in my vineyard. And they said, fine, we'll do it. So he took them to the vineyard and put them to work. Then it says he went back the third hour. And he did the same thing. He looked around. He found some workers and said, go to my vineyard and work, and whatsoever I deem fair, I'll pay you. Now, unlike the first group of laborers, which they decided on a price, he was going to pay them a denarius, which was the average wage for a day's work. He didn't agree upon a wage. He said, whatsoever I pay you, I'll pay you. They agreed. So they went out. The sixth hour, says he came back. Did the same thing. The ninth hour he came back, did the same thing. Tells me he's got an awful big vineyard if he keeps coming back getting more people. And then the 11th hour, which was just 1 hour before quitting time, he went back to the marketplace again. He found some there and he says, why have you been standing here idle all day? And they said, because nobody's picked us. And he says, well, you go work in my vineyard and I'll pay you whatever I think's fair. And so they went and worked. Now, I wonder sometimes, where were these at when he came the first time? Or did he just pick certain ones and he just didn't take all of them that were there? I don't know. Doesn't really make any difference. But he came the first time at the third hour, the sixth hour, the ninth hour, and the 11th hour. So 5 different times he went to the marketplace and he got workers to work in his vineyard. So when even was come, in other words, the work day is through. So when even was come, the Lord of the vineyard said unto his steward, call the laborers and give them their hire, beginning from the last unto the first. And when they came, they were hired about the 11th hour. They received every man a penny, which is a denarius. But when the first came, they supposed that they should have received more, and they likewise received every man a penny. So at the end of the day, the householder, or the Lord, came and said, the work day's through. It's time to pay the help, because in those times you were paid at the end of the day for the work you did that day. It wasn't like we do today. You get paid twice a month, every 2 weeks, and you have to work 2 weeks before you get paid, and you got a waiting period and all this. No, if you worked, you got paid that day. 2 things happened that was strange and unusual. The first was, he said, pay them beginning with the last first. In other words, pay the ones that I hired at the 11th hour first before you pay any of the other. Normally, it would have been protocol or normal to pay the ones that had worked all day long first. But he said, no, pay the last first. So the steward paid them a penny or a denarius, which was a day's wage. Now, these people had worked 1 hour. Then he paid the ones that were hired at the 9th hour. They'd worked 3 hours. He said, pay them a denarius, a day's wages. The ones that were hired at the 6th hour got a denarius, a full day's wages. Those that were hired at the 3rd hour got a denarius, a full day's wage. So those that had been hired first at the start of the day, they were thinking and expecting, we're going to get more. This is going to be good. They got a denarius, a day's wage. Now, when this happened, These that had been working all day had received, they thought they should have received more. It says, and when they had received it, they murmured against the good man of the house. Now, the particular word translated murmured here is not, I don't like the translation murmured. The word translated here, you need something stronger there. Protested would be a better word. As I look at this, when I first read this, my first thought, and again, I'm thinking from a human standpoint, not from a godly standpoint. My first thought was, well, they got a legitimate gripe. They worked all day long. If they worked a 12-hour day, they worked 12 hours. These that were hired at the 11th hour worked 1 hour, and they got the same thing. Well, they should have gotten more. Saying, these last have wrought but 1 hour, and thou hast made them equal unto us, which have borne the burden and heat of the day. Here they are murmuring. They're making their gripe known. Look at what God says here. It says, but he answered one of them and said, friend, I do thee no wrong. Didst not thou agree with me for a penny? Take that thine is, and go thy way. I will give unto this last, even as unto thee. Is it not lawful for me to do what I will with mine own? Is thine eye evil because I am good? He says, wait a minute. Why are you upset? Did not we agree that you would work for me for 1 day's wage, for a denarius? Is that not what we agreed to? Well, yeah. I mean, they had to admit, yeah, that's what we agreed to. He said, well, I gave you a day's wage, so what's your gripe? What's your complaining about? I remember this story because so oftentimes, especially in the workplace, I'll see someone in the position that I had for a long while. Someone would come to me and they would complain about so-and-so was making more than they were, yet they were doing more than so-and-so. And I would think back to this story because I was one of those sometimes. I thought, well, I ought to be making more than so-and-so because I do twice the work that they're doing. But then I thought, okay, when I was hired, I was told what I was going to be paid. In other words, I was offered a job at this salary. I had several choices. I could say no and walk away. I could say yes and accept it. Or I could negotiate and try and get a higher salary. Doesn't mean you're going to get one. I was always the kind that I didn't particularly want to rock the boat, so I didn't negotiate, so I accepted. So when I saw somebody that was making more than I was, I changed my attitude and I'd say, good for them. So what if I do twice what they do? I'm getting paid what I agreed that I was going to get. My mama used to have a saying, and I love that saying. It was, I'd love to buy him for what he thinks I'd love to buy him for what he's worth and sell him for what he thinks he's worth. We all think sometimes we're more important than what we are. I've been there, and I've heard people say, well, I'll show them, I'll just quit. Tell you what, when you quit, be somebody in your spot the very next day. Probably making more money than you were making. I'm being serious. I mean, you're not, you can take that attitude, but again, they haven't done you anything wrong. You accepted a salary. And last time I read is you're supposed to give a man a fair day's work for a fair day's wages. Doesn't matter if you think you're being paid what you're worth. Some of us, if we had to live off what we were worth, we've actually paid what we were worth, we'd starve to death. I don't know where I got that from, but last verse. And I told you you're going to see it again. It says, so the last shall be first, and the first last. For many be called, but few chosen. Now, the thing about all these laborers that were chosen here at the different hours of the day is they were all believers. They all represented believers. It was not the lost. Just because someone is a believer and is a Christian does not mean they're not going to gripe, does not mean that they're not going to complain. It's our job, I think, as a Christian to help them through that time. And when I say help them through that time, I don't mean agree with them and commiserate with them, say, you're right, brother, yeah, you're worth more than they are. I'm saying tell it like God did here, and brother, are you getting what you agreed to work for? Do you not feel that you're giving a fair day's work for a fair day's pay at the end of the time period? Too often, we try to make people feel good about things when we need to tell them like it is. That's one thing I admire about our pastor, is the few times that I have asked Hank something specifically, Hank does not say, well, I think. Hank says, well, the Bible says, which is what I need to hear. Doesn't matter what I think. I used to be real good, my wife will tell you, about giving my opinion on things, sometimes whether you ask for it or not. I try not to do that anymore. If you ask me for my opinion, I will give it to you, but I'll also tell you up front, that's my opinion and my opinion only. But you need to be asking, what does the Bible say about it? I'm not Hank. I can't quote the Bible like he can, and I can't relate everything to the Bible. If you give me enough time, I'll go back and find something in the Bible that refers to it, and I'll answer that question for you. But a lot of times I cannot do it on the spot like that. As a matter of fact, I have had times before when somebody would ask something and I would have to say, brother, let me get back to you on that, and go do some research and then come back with something to back it up in the Bible. God is God. God can do whatever He wants to. As believers, we all are going to get rewards. Like I said, in heaven. Some of us are going to have the same reward. Now, maybe you were saved at a young age, maybe 12, 13, 14, 15. Some of us, and I point toward myself, were saved at a later age when we were 33 or something like that. Do you deserve more rewards than I do simply because you've been serving longer? Well, you do if you're doing the right things and you're producing a lot of fruit during that time, but it's not about how long you've been serving, just like it was not about how long these laborers worked. It's about what you're doing. Are you making good use of the time that you have? I wish I'd have been saved when I was younger. I could have done a whole lot more in that first 33 years than what I did, which was nothing. I mean, really. It's hard to lead people to Christ when you've never met Him yourself. I was one of those that thought, like the rich young ruler, I'm a pretty good fella. I never drank, didn't smoke. Well, I take that back. I smoked a pipe for 1 month because I thought it looked cool. A guy that worked with me worked part-time in a pipe shop at South Park Mall, and he got these fancy pipes and all this flavorful tobacco that had all these. You know, I thought that looked cool. I looked cool with that pipe. One of those pipes that come out and down like this and up. But I thought, you know, I'm a pretty good person. I see these other people doing all this stuff. Didn't run around on my wife or anything like that. And it took me 33 years to figure out I was as bad as any of them. If you commit one sin, it's the same as committing all of them. When you're banking on the law to save you, you've got to